안녕하세요. Hello, everyone. My name is Marcy Tanter, and I'm very pleased to be here today to share with you my vision of the spirit of May 18. 5 years ago, I had never heard of the Gwangju Democratic Uprising. Today, it is one of my passions and is something I think about every single day. I first learned about the uprising during my first visit to Gwangju in the summer of 2017 when I came to teach summer school at Jeonnam National University. Prior to this visit, I had no idea that an important event in Korean history would lead me here today to tell you why it's important to me. When I saw Hong Song-dam's huge mural, I was struck first by its cartoonish style. At first, I didn't know how to take the mural seriously because I didn't know why it was important. As my guide explained it to me, I realized the style was not cartoonish, but is in line with folk art. It's very much Minjung art, which is art created by the people, for the people. The central figure, standing tall, towers over the buildings and the people to lead them to democracy. The banner held beneath him reads, Minjok Haebang, National Liberation. In the faces of the people around him, we don't see any despair or anguish. They are banded together, united for the single cause of freedom and democracy. Upon further inspection and knowing it was painted on the old education building, I understood what a tribute it was to the students who began the uprising. What I initially saw as cartoonish provides a vivid feeling of movement as the main figure rises to lead the others below him. And those figures in turn stand in solidarity with him, standing up to move forward. Even though the mural was painted 16 years after the uprising, and I was seeing the mural a further 21 years later, I could feel the strength of purpose and honor Hong captured. The mural has become important to me also because I have taught summer school at Jeonnam National University twice, and I have brought students there from my home university. When I teach them about Gwangju in Gwangju, I can't help but connect my students with those who stood up to the police on May 18th, just steps away from my classroom. I was still in high school in May 1980, so I think about what I was doing on those days, completely unaware of what was happening so far away in South Korea. One of my Korean students, told me that his father had been a Jeonnam student at the time, but he had fled the city instead of staying, and his father now suffers from intense guilt. I told the student I didn't blame his father for leaving, and that if he had stayed, my student might not have been born. He told me his mother said the same thing, but his father insisted that he had betrayed his friends, a few of whom had been killed or wounded. I never met this man, and I don't know how he feels today, but I see him as another of Chundawan's victims carrying pain that might never get better. I have read about others like him who carried great guilt for leaving Gwangju or for not protecting someone or who perceived they could have fought harder or longer. Those of us who weren't there can never know any of this pain, but we owe it to the victims to make sure that the world knows about it. The on-campus museum at Jeonnam, the May 18 Foundation, the Mongol Cemetery, and Peace Park, these sites strike me every time I visit, as they did the first time. Artifacts like bloody teguki, broken spoons, torn clothing, odd shoes, broken glasses, all belong to real people who died or were wounded. They sit in cases anonymously, their owners long gone and impossible to trace, but speaking volumes, screaming about the injustice that made them artifacts rather than bits of trash that were worn out from years of use. It hurts me to see these just as I hurt when I see hair and clothing that belong to victims of the Holocaust. Everyday items that we own and rarely care about become precious reminders of humanity, wiped out by government troops deemed legal by dictators who had no regard for the status of others. Who wore that shirt? Whose fingers had to keep pushing those glasses up their nose? Who played soccer in those shoes one day and died in them the next? Who were these owners? We can't memorialize. The photographs and burial mounds often make me cry or at least tear up. So many beautiful faces line the walls of the huge shrine in Mongol Cemetery, many of them young college students, some just children. The spirit of the uprising can be sensed through these photographs as people of all ages and walks of life united to demand democracy and freedom from the oppression of the military dictatorship they never asked for. Walking through the burial mounds is peaceful, yet we know all the citizens buried there died needlessly and far too soon, no matter their age at death. I can only hope that they know their deaths lit a flame that burned for 12 more years and their sacrifice is remembered annually. Apart from the physical remnants of the uprising, another legacy concerns me personally. During the uprising, the United States government was in constant contact with Chun's government, and the U.S. allowed the release of some troops that were used to commit atrocities in Gwangju. President Carter seems to have given carte blanche to his cabinet and close advisors while he attended to other matters, the result of which was that instead of demanding that Chun not send troops to Gwangju, the Americans advised Chun that it was not a good idea to do it. American Ambassador Gleistein had no first-hand knowledge of what was happening in Gwangju and didn't even attempt to send someone there to assess the situation. He relied on what he was spoon-fed from Chun's advisors and the weak President Choi, and so fell for the lie that North Korean agitators were stirring trouble in Gwangju. He was so sure of the information he was given that he said, "The students are proceeding remorselessly with their challenge to law and order and appear to be doing so with a great deal of coordination and direction." This undated photograph of Chun and Gleistein shows them to be on friendly terms. Both look relaxed and are smiling. It's impossible for me to forget that Chun was a murderous dictator. How could Gleistein be so comfortable, even though he had a job to do? At least one American Peace Corps volunteer who was in Gwangju the entire time tried to get testimony to the Americans, but he was rebuffed. Rather than insist that Chun use peaceful means to quell the supposed rioters, the American government stepped back so as not to be involved in a domestic matter and planned to push for more humane treatment of citizens when the uprising was over. Because the Americans didn't investigate the uprising during or after the event, they persisted in seeing the protesters as rioters and rebels. There was no rioting reported once by eyewitnesses, but the negativity was spread by Chun, embassy staff, and American military commanders, so there was no reason not to believe what Chun's people said. When I see the photographs and footage of these days, when I read accounts and hear testimony, I am ashamed of how my government was involved in this massacre of innocent people. There is nothing I can do or say to heal the people of Gwangju, but I can teach the history and artistry connected to it, and I can take part in events like this to share the responsibility. I speak about the uprising at academic conferences and teach uprising-related literature to my students in Texas. Very few Americans know that it happened, so every new person I tell is one more who might share with their friends and families. In this way, I can spread the spirit of May 18 and do my part, making sure more Americans know that it happened. This year marks the 40th anniversary of the uprising. In his address at this year's commemoration, President Moon Jae-in spoke of the May spirit. One of the things he said was, "We need broader sympathies for the May spirit, which should be reborn from one generation to the next. The May spirit does not belong to any one person, but to all of us." As the world has grappled with the COVID-19 pandemic, Koreans have shared supplies with fellow citizens and have sent them around the world, sometimes for free, sometimes for low cost. This is an example of what President Moon meant, that we treat each other with humanity, that we recognize each other's humanity, that we keep the true democratic spirit flowing from the past into the future, from generation to generation. In the recorded histories of humanity, there are relatively few instances of citizens rising up against oppressive governments. There are probably thousands of reasons why this is true, not least of which would be opportunity and power. I am humbled by the Gwangju citizens who were so brave and so determined to face the police and military who dared to put down what began as peaceful, honorable protest. It is not difficult to appreciate the sacrifices made by all the individuals and families during those 9 days in May, but it is difficult for me to follow their example. Many people in Gwangju continue to feel the effects from the uprising, but they honor the legacy of their friends, loved ones, and fellow citizens. They continue to seek the truth of what happened, and they continue to push for the government to investigate the many secrets still not uncovered. To me, the Gwangju spirit lives on in that legacy and in the organizations like the May 18 Foundation and events and memorials that keep the victims from being forgotten. It's also found in the friends of Gwangju who stayed in the city to help and document what was going on, so the outside world knew of the uprising and of the government's use of extreme violence. As we share the story of Gwangju around the world, we spread the inspiration of the Gwangju spirit and show people that it's worth being the spark that ignites a flame. To conclude, I would like to read English translation of the poem Epitaph in the Mongwal Cemetery in memory of Hwang Il-bong by Ko Chung-hee. How could the karma ravaging one generation only affect the souls sleeping at Mongwal Cemetery? They started a seed fire to the stacks of the age of darkness, opening up the wide sky. They were buried, burnt up like the charcoal of the Hwangsung battlefield. Today they stop the passing moon and question. They ask about the wages of my sin. How could the scars of the knife that ravaged one generation be only the wages of my sin? When I face the moon, I feel like a Philistine, and I know a bunch of mums is just not enough. As I meet with your only remaining eye, rising as the moon, I feel ashamed. Today, all I add is my helplessness, my light that won't even cover up one plot. 감사합니다. Thank you. Be well, stay safe, and may we all be united in the spirit of Gwangju and May 18.